Patrick Cooch from the Carlton Footy Club. You listen to the Coaches Panel.
James Walker here from the Brisbane Lions.
Jason Johannesson from the Western Bulldogs.
Luke Parker here from the Sydney Swans.
It's Roy Sloane here from the Adelaide Crows, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Max Orr, Melbourne Football Club.
This is Matt Fyfe from the Fremantle Footy Club, and you're listening to the Coaches Panel.
Number 43 in the 50 most relevant for the 2020 fantasy footy season is St Kilda Saint Dylan Roberton. He was a surprise packet premium a few years ago. Then sadly, his health has stopped his ability to fully live up to his potential, but he's up and firing at the moment. There is plenty of stuff to talk about Dylan. Joining me to do so for his first podcast of the year, I got Tim. Hello, man. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Yeah, well, good. Well, you're about to get back to work, mate, so it's not great, but look, it's fine. I'm sure you're a happy employee in what you're doing in life. And let's talk about Dylan. 28 years old defender. Nothing from his 2019 stats to talk about. He was ruled out throughout the entirety of the year. Thankfully, he's been given the medical all clear now. But those heart conditions that surfaced a little bit a few years ago in 2018 ruled him out across the 2019 season. As such, he is priced at an insanely low price, Tim. $260,400 in SuperCoach, just over $325,000 in AFL Fantasy, and just under $320K in AFL DreamTeam. And when we talk about Dylan Roberton, Tim, it's been a really tough couple of years for him over the past couple of years. He opened up the 2018 season, with 190 odd in SuperCoach. However, just 3 weeks later, I remember watching the game down at Geelong, just collapsed suddenly in the game. No one at the time, but it turned out he had an irregular heartbeat, and it meant from that point on, and now throughout all of the 2019 season, we haven't seen Dylan Roberton at AFL level.
No, that's right. I think he had the same thing happen in the preseason last year too, didn't he? Sort of got all the advice and tried to come back, and he's got a permanent defibrillator installed that just sort of went off on him. So, I mean, good sign is that it sort of does its job, I suppose. But, it's been a big couple of years for him, just trying to make sure that he's all right and he's okay to play. And I know he's had a lot of different medical advice, and the AFL's ticked it off and all that. So, hopefully it's all behind him now.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. The club and the AFL and Dylan and his doctors have all done the right due diligence, taken the right precautions to take care of his long-term health, not just to get a footy player back on the field, but to take care of him as a person, which they've certainly done that. That defibrillator is installed in his chest, as you mentioned. He also takes regular medication, and the club are regularly monitoring his heart rate as well. So, look, the positive for Dylan and potential fantasy owners is he's currently completing a modified preseason program. However, those modifications are more so just to keep him regularly monitored. Both he and the club, though, are really confident he's going to be ready to go round one. And that's exciting for us because a few years ago, he averaged over 90 across all the formats of the game. And we're paying, again, depending on the format, anywhere from as low as $260,000 to as much as $330,000. So he's a potential insane value. That year that he was priced incredibly cheap that I want to allude to was back in 2017. In SuperCoach that year, he averaged 92.5, went over the 100 marker in 8 games, including a huge 149 against the Hawks. For DreamTeam and Fantasy Coaches, well, he averaged 90 that year as well. 8 tons, 3 of them over 120. And as strong as those early numbers were, it was actually his first 12 games of the year were even more impressive because the first 12 rounds of that season, he was going at 102 in AFL Fantasy and DreamTeam and 104 in SuperCoach. So for a guy that's under 330K in all formats, we're getting a guy who's capable of going on huge runs and averaging a significant amount for us.
Well, look, I mean, if you could guarantee that he was going to go back to those averages, you'd just have to start him, wouldn't you, at those prices? I mean, if he's going to average 90 in any format, priced at 260 or 330,000, then for sure we'd pick him. So I guess it's just a matter of us working out: is he straight back into the best 22? Is he back into his good role? Is he going to keep scoring those points? Because if the answer to all of those is yes, well then I think you're putting him in your starting team.
Well, I think so, and that really does become the thing about what are the justifications and the reasons, for selecting him. I genuinely believe he is in the St Kilda best side. He will take a little bit of time. We're talking about already, this preseason, we already talked about a number of guys coming off injuries, and to anticipate that they will start a little bit slower. Yesterday we talked about Callan Ward. Earlier in the week, in the podcast, we talked about Tom Duday. These guys that are coming off significant injuries, significant time off. Don't expect them to come straight back to their very peak of their powers, rather knowing it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks for them to get back into the rhythm of AFL football. But look, at his price point, he's so difficult to ignore, and it's not just because he's had one great season. Back in 2015, when he first moved to St Kilda after being at Fremantle, he played 20 games and averaged 82.8 in fantasy and DreamTeam, 4 tons that year. And SuperCoach, he averaged 90.5 and had 5 scores over 100, all of which are over 115. So he's got the potential and the capacity, and arguably he could turn into a season-long keeper and maybe even push into the top 15 defenders for the year. Again, if everything goes right with his health.
Yeah, that's right. And I think you just mentioned, so he's basically had 2 and a couple of games, 2 really good seasons from fantasy point of view where he scored or averaged over 80 or over 90 as a defender, and they've generally coincided with the years that he's been able to play that role with the Saints, where the other Saints defenders look for him to take it out of the back line. And he's had, a lot of rebound 50s and marks and that sort of thing. I think the year in between those, 2016, so he basically wasn't able to have that role as much. So I think a few people got burned starting him in that year, and he just didn't quite have the same point-scoring role. So do you think he would be back to his regular role? I mean, obviously he hasn't had that role for the past 2 seasons because he's been out. And I think Josh Battle had it a bit last year, and other players. So do you think he'd be the man straight being into that role next year?
Yeah, look, I do think so. And it'll be interesting to see how Brett Rutten does structure up his side, even though he got a number of games to the back end of last year as coach. The way they did choose to structure up was probably playing more with probably 3 talls more than anything else. Look, Wilkie, who played in the back line too, was over 190 centimetres, so they've really... To end the year, they were playing Carlisle, Brown, Wilkie, and Rowe. Battle was in there as well. So I do seem to think that they'll look to play multiple talls. Carlisle and the brand new inclusion in Dougal Howard, I think they're the ones that are going to hold down that key defensive sort of roles. And then players like a Wilkie, Battle, and a Roberton are going to be given a little bit of ability to play small tall if required, depending on the matchups. But yeah, look, Dylan Roberton for me is pretty safely inside that best 22. He does give them the ability to play him in multiple positions, and given his flexibility shown, and even when we talk about his height and he's 194, but he's actually quite an agile player. So yeah, I'm quite confident that he's going to be fine and getting in there, and the addition of Dougal Howard's going to make him a really great pick. And look, he could turn into this year's Zach Williams and Brodie Smith for us.
Yeah, and the advantage of his price too is that you don't have to have him end up as a back premium either. You only need him to make a certain amount of money, and then you have the decision to make whether it's worth keeping him or whether he's done his job. So I guess we don't really, as long as he's playing round 1, you don't really have to make that decision on him until he's played a few games.
Yeah, and look, he doesn't have to go 90. You're right, at that price point, an average of 80, which is considerably less on what we've seen him do between now and his multi-buy round. That's a significant gain for us as well. So look at that price point. If he's fit, and obviously it's making sure his health is the key factor in this, I just don't see how I can say no to him at that price. If he was $450,000, yeah, maybe I'd have a little bit more hesitation. But at that price point, I don't see any risk. The only reason I can see someone being hesitant around him is they're genuinely convinced he won't intercept and he'll play lockdown defensive role, or they're scared off him being on the round 12 bye. But I don't think that's an excuse, because given you'll get 11 weeks of price rises out of him.
Yeah, and I think, look, the only other reason, and touch wood it doesn't happen, but I'm sure some people will be wary of him having a third issue, because if it does happen, if his defibrillator does kick in again, which is a good sign that it's keeping him safe, but it just might mean that, he's at small risk of it happening again. If it happens early in a game, then that's sort of a low score on someone's field. Just to mention it, because I know some people will have that in their mind. I think,
Yes.
look, he's missed 2 years with it. It's happened on 2 occasions. Is there a risk of it happening again? So it's something to keep in mind, but I would imagine the risk is quite low.
Yeah, no, look, I think so too. Look, for me right now, it feels like a fairly straightforward selection. Again, barring he keeps checking off all the medical boxes. We see him through the preseason games. He's locked in at pretty much at D4 for me in all of the formats. And we see him doing full training and playing. I'm pretty much going to lock him in and throw away the key. What about you?
Look, at this stage, yeah, he'd be in, but again, I just keep tabs on his pre-season, see how he's going closer to round one, I suppose. If he picked round one, it'd be hard to say no.
No, I think so. Yeah, I think so. What do you do in drafts, though, with him? Because it's really fascinating to me because, again, depending when your timing is of the draft, how close it is to the preseason, how much we've seen of Dylan, might create a variable about how early he goes in a draft. But he's got the potential to actually score at a D2 level, but you'll probably be picking him up as a D4, gosh, maybe even a D5, depending on, the kind of coaches you find yourself drafting against.
Yeah, that's right. And look, if he does have everything go right and he ends up scoring like a D2 for you, then the worst thing that can happen is that you're in a draft with someone else who thinks that and thinks, right, well, I'd better pick him as my D2. And you're like, look, there's no value there. And you've stolen one of my guys from a few rounds later down the track. And you're like, there's no point drafting him at D2 because you can get someone else who doesn't have the risk, who
100%.
most likely will be a D2. So you want to pick him and go for a bit of value. The only question is whether you think he gives more value than someone else and whether you get in ahead of him. So certainly if you can get him at your D4 or later, that'd be pretty good value, you'd think.
Well, yeah, you talk about guys that are likely a D2 selection. Potentially you could be looking at options, depending on the formats you're playing, you could be looking at guys like Sicily, Dawson, Johannesson, Cade Simpson might be a bit of a stretch through there. A Nick Vlosten with now no Alex Rance. He should be good. Hunter Clark, Wayne Miller. These are all guys that are scattered through their averages, in terms of rank around the 20s and 30s across the formats. There's no way you're picking Dylan Roberton ahead of these guys.
No, that's right. There's no real need to, because you wouldn't expect that even if things go well, that he'd score much different to those guys anyway.
Yeah. No, I think so, man. All right. I appreciate your thoughts today as we've talked about Dylan Robertson.
No worries.
If you want to get... No, mate, my pleasure. Look, if you want to go and check out the article about him or any of the other players revealed so far in the 50 Most Relevant, you can go and check that out at coachespanel.tv. If you're loving the podcast episodes, please leave a 5-star rating and review. Tell others about this great fantasy football resource that you have found. And if you want exclusive and early access content to get these podcasts and other bits of content early, well, you can join our Patreon army at coachespanel.tv. Has got all your links. Louis has just joined in, so well done to you, mate. You are now ahead of the game when it comes to the 50 Most Relevant and getting some exclusive content. We're getting close to wrapping up the 40s of the 50 Most Relevant, and tomorrow, Tim, I think I might get you back because there's an absolute cracker I want to talk to you about.